of historians, though Nehru had a deep antipathy towards Dr. Rajendra Prasad's proposal to go and inaugurate or reconstruct the Somnath temple. In a sense, as Dr. Sampath says, fossilize its rebirth or renaissance, reconstruction or what have you. How would that not have influenced the historians of the time or the makers of the syllabus of the time? Do you agree with this, or do you just believe that this was accidental, some great minds worked and they came up with textbooks and they said it as it was?
I don't think it's that innocent. I'll give you perhaps a nugget. So, Roshan Seth, the actor, plays Nehru in Bharat Ek Khoj. And in the episode that speaks of Prithviraj Chauhan, it ends with a reference to Prithviraj Raso, which speaks of how Ghori was killed by a blinded Prithviraj Chauhan. And that's how that particular story ends. But Nehru's comment with respect to that particular ending is, this is perhaps make-believe. And I don't think this would have been the case. And that perhaps defeated people are trying to invent fables and legends to assuage or mollify their own defeated sentiments. That seems to be the running train of Nehruvian thought across his works. And this is not, let's say, a sample position that you take out of context. This is his running thought. Now, I would agree with Mr. Khurshid if assume for a moment two sets of scholars with divergent opinions were equally patronized for their positions in scholarship. And then the public had an opportunity to consume both points of view and to determine which of these is more evidence-based, which of these is more consistent with the immediate incident of the partition or the ghastly episode of the partition, and which of these is more believable. What is it that we would like to draw lessons from? Now, it so happens that a particular line of historians were completely kept outside the pale of the establishment. R.C. Majumdar, Jadunath Sakkar, all of these people who were comfortable presenting uncomfortable truths were relegated to the margins. So therefore, it's not as if all historians who were willing to present a certain point of view were given an opportunity. So I'm not willing to buy that. Second, assume for a moment that the ghastly specter of partition hadn't taken place and we were still living in an undivided, united India. I would still buy the premise to some extent that why would you want to dig up an uncomfortable past when somehow after 1,000 years of bloodshed, two major communities have managed to find peace to live with each other alongside each other as part of a single nation. But after the partition, on the basis of a two-nation theory, which clearly has a religious basis, what mythical unity are you trying to build and what mythical peace are you trying to build after millions of people have already lost their lives and Bharat has lost about 30% of its land, so to speak, at the very least? So what is this unity that you're trying to build on the altar of falsified history? I can understand that there's an incentive to build this unity and this peace-building initiative, provided the partition hadn't taken place. But after the partition, at the very least, the government has an obligation to place historical facts. Allow people to come forward and say that this is what has happened, there is a continuum as far as this particular mindset is concerned, and there cannot be a repeat of this particular mindset for the benefit of our own people. Now, I am not willing for a moment to buy the fact that the exodus, the forced exodus of Kashmiri Pandits from Kashmir has nothing to do with the mindset that resulted in the partition. I am unable to buy that particular fact. Therefore, this is not an archival study in the past. It is as much a study of an ongoing present, which is going to repeat itself, or at least, at the very least, is repeating itself across several parts of the country. Therefore, I don't think history is merely a question of looking back, learning certain lessons and moving forward. Because if it were that easy, why would you have placards with respect to Aryan invasion theory at every protest relating to a reservation? So history remains relevant to every contemporary discussion, unfortunately or fortunately so. Then we might as well ensure that there is a plurality of voices. So here's one suggestion that I make. And this is on the basis of my discussion with several historians. And I hope Dr. Vikram Sampath weighs in on this. Perhaps history should be taken away from the realm of the government altogether, and let there be a body of independent experts who are in a position to arrive at some kind of consensus with respect to what kind of curriculum needs to be presented in school syllabi. This happens in other countries. We seem to be learning the worst of principles from the West. But the best of principles also means independent actors and independent experts on subject matter, they come together and they formulate the study. and parents are invited for their inputs on whether you want this particular thing to be presented as school curriculum, so on and so forth. That's a suggestion that's possible. But you see, the so-called non-left in this country would still be comfortable with that particular suggestion. But those who believe that history needs to be utilized to perpetuate a particular myth about this particular country as a defeated society and as a defeated nation would never want to let go of any kind of control over history as a domain and humanities as a domain. That's been the reality. As someone who has spent a significant amount of time talking to students across campuses in several lectures, this much I can vouch for a fact, that history is a real battleground. And that means it translates to policy making, it translates to curriculum, it translates to legal education, it translates to all kinds of submissions being made even before the Supreme Court of the land. I'm sure you followed the arguments that were presented as part of the EWS case before the Supreme Court. I would say that was a textbook instance of Nehruvian distorted history being mainstreamed through arguments before the highest court of the land. And I was very happy that people could finally see what kind of versions of history have actually been bought lock, stock and barrel by members of the establishment, so the so-called Nehruvian establishment, and what is being presented to oppose the EWS. I'm not on the question of EWS, but on how history was weaponized in the Supreme Court during the course of a policy discussion. So I'm very clear that history is never going to be free of contestation. I'm only hoping that people have the courage of their conviction and the honesty to wear their biases on their sleeve and allow the evidence to speak for itself so that the public can ask itself whether the bias prevails over the evidence or the evidence prevails over the bias. That's something for people to decide. That's what I'm here for.
Mr. Verma,